up a dive. Feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, so I remember I share and subscribe. Join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, the secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you're joining me for the next hour or so, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook or X, where the show goes out live every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Central, or maybe you're watching it archived on one of those sites, or listening to the show later on one of the many audio podcast platforms that all of the shows on the Untold Radio Network go out on. So greetings. It's so wonderful to have you here. I hope those of you who celebrate the Easter weekend just enjoyed your Easter or whatever you got up to. I hope it was fun. I had a jam-packed weekend, which was awesome. Plus it was my birthday weekend, so I got to spend a lot of time both with my girlfriend and my wonderful daughter. So that was just a nice 3 days, really, for me, from Friday through the Sunday. Anyway, enough chitter-chatter blabbering from me. No time to waste tonight. We have one of my favorite people in the whole broader Fortean realm as our guest, and he's contributed to the Fortean Times, Fate Magazine, Weirdo, Nickelodeon, Cabinet, Typo, and other fine publications. His many books include short stories, a novel, Nominata, and translations of many Bohemians, occultists, and visionaries, including Alphonse Allais, Charles Cros, Alfred Jarry, Luigi Russolo, and Giovanni Battists Nazari. And I probably mispronounced some of those, so apologies. He has written music for theatre and dance, most conspicuously for Bill Irwin's show The Regard of Flight, which toured for decades. His albums include That Regrettable Weekend, It All Went Pfft, and An Afternoon in the Arboretum are available on Bandcamp, as is another new album we'll be talking about tonight, which is related to his current book. TV and movie appearances include great performances, Martin Mull's Talent Takes a Holiday, Ed, Crocodile Dundee II, obviously a big favorite of mine, given that I'm from Sydney, Australia originally, and several of George Kuchar's videos. He's played piano on the BBC, played ukulele on the Joe Franklin Show, and an Aerosmith release party. And I wish I had been at that Aerosmith release party. I can only imagine how much fun that would have been. He's emceed at the Rainbow and Stars, read the audiobook of Kiarna Boyd's scary novel, Blessed and Cursed Alike, and lectured on various questionable topics at the American Visionary Art Museum, the Morbid Anatomy Museum, the Bakken Museum of Electricity in Healing, and the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And that's not too far from me. I'm not sure when he lectured there, but I'm sad I missed it because maybe I was already living in the US by that stage, and many other places, including where I first saw him at Fort in 99, but that's another story, and we'll chat about that maybe a little bit in the show. And for many years, he's maintained a tribute site to the writer John Keel, and that's a wonderful site. It's just loaded with everything Keelian and just things about the Fortean and anomalous world in general. And I suggest if you have any interest in any of that, and of course, many of you probably are aware of John Keel because he wrote the wonderful, really game-changing book, The Mothman Prophecies, and the movie of that title was based on it, of course. And you can visit that at johnkeel.com. And his book on anomalous music from elsewhere, was published last year by Strange Attractor Books in the UK and is distributed in the US by the MIT Press. And it's an incredible book. I adore it. I just read it and it's absolutely amazing. So I am delighted, I'm beyond delighted really, to welcome to Talking Weird someone that I have long admired, the one and only Doug Skinner. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean. Welcome to you too. And welcome music lovers out there.
Well, it almost is welcome to you because I feel like I'm visiting you in your home and you're visiting me in the studio at the same time. So.
Yes.
So I'll fill the listeners and viewers in just a little bit because I first met you a long time ago now when I was doing my PhD research when I still lived in Australia. I was writing my dissertation on American UFO belief. So I came over here and I visited all kinds of lectures and conferences and UFO, hotspots and Area 51s and Roswell's and the like. And one of the places I could not visit was Fortfest because John Keel was an integral part of Fortfest back in the day. Yeah. And he was speaking there where I fortunately got to meet him. And you were very good friends with John. And I got to meet you as well. And it's probably my fondest memory of that entire research trip. That and meeting Jim Moseley in Clearwater, Florida, to meet all you guys was amazing. But I bought a book there, which is like it's kind of this classic. It's a publication, which you obviously know what I'm talking about, and it's called The Flying Saucer Subculture. And it was something John wrote years before, and then he published and he sold it at UFO conventions.
Well, he wrote it for something called, I think, the Journal of Popular Culture originally. And then he started a New York Fortean Society sometime in the 90s. And he put out a few publications under that imprint. And that was one of them. And he asked me to draw a cartoon cover for it. So we had a lot of fun coming up with all sorts of ufological jokes in there. And he actually paid me for it, which astonished all of his friends that I actually got like $50 or whatever it was out of John Keel. I think he bought me a coffee once too, which was also considered quite an accomplishment among his friends.
I bought him, I think, a Diet Coke or two when I got to hang with him in a bar and interview him for my dissertation. At Fortfest is where that was. And there's a Darrow in that picture as well, underneath the table where the men in black are.
Yes,
or just to the side of the table where the men in black are.
Coming out of the trapdoor, and that's based on the Darrow that's on the, well, I know it's on the first issue of The Hidden World. It might be, have appeared in Amazing Stories before then, but that's a sort of a classic depiction of a Darrow.
You're right, and it's only because I'm spending so much time talking about Shaver and Palmer and researching them. Originally, it was in the June 1947 issue of Amazing Stories, if I recall.
That picture was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the one you've based the Darrow with the elephant-like nose, nose on. And this, you very kindly sent me this copy. It must be over a year ago now that I scanned for this because I'd lost most of my UFO library from Australia, including my treasured version of this book, which originally I got John Keel to sign at that Fortfest, and he wrote on that cover or sign on that cover, best John Keel, and you'd signed underneath it second best Doug Skinner. And it was one of my favorite, literally one of my favorite treasures I own. So I'm so grateful you replaced it, but I still don't have that one with the signatures on it, unfortunately.
And I wouldn't forge it. I wouldn't do a thing like that. So,
man, I should have slipped you like $100 and said, "Can you forward yours and John's signature?" I'm totally joking. Speaking of John, though, quickly, we mentioned in the introduction, johnkeel.com. People should really visit that site, because congratulations to you, sir, for maintaining johnkeel.com or building johnkeel.com and having all of that data about John online and various treasures from his collection. And it's a site I visited hundreds of times. I adore it, and I'm sure most people in the Fortean world who were fans of Keel like I was really appreciate it as well.
Well, as you mentioned, John and I were friends for many years, and I was one of the people that was taking care of him near the end, when he was not going very gently into that good night. He was a real trial at the end. But I was one of his medical proxies, along with Larry Sloman, known universally as Ratso. I don't know if you know Ratso Sloman, but he was an editor of High Times, editor of the National Lampoon. In fact, he got John some articles in High Times.
Oh, wow. And again, I don't think people have often enough mentioned how important you were in taking care of John at the end of his life. And I didn't know John hardly at all, although I'm a massive fanboy. So I at the time was, or when I heard out, I was very appreciative that you'd taken care of him like that. So thank you for that.
And so both Ratso and I ended up with many of his papers. So I've been posting the ones that I have on the site there just for his fans. We do plan to give them a permanent home at some point. But right now, people who are interested can consult them, at least can read them.
Oh, no, like I said, it's an incredible service. But as much as I would love to talk to you about John all night, talk to you about Darrow and the Shaver Mystery all night, talk to you about Fort Fest from long ago all night, we're here tonight to talk about your incredible new book, Music from Elsewhere. And when I say, I don't even know I should say new, because I think you might have published something since then, but it's a new book. I mean, it came out within the last 6 months or so, right?
Yeah, it came out last year. I think it came out first in the UK and then a little later through MIT in the US. And
it was Strange Attractor who published it in the UK, I think.
Yes, Strange Attractor. You can find them at strangeattractor.co.uk if you like. And this was Strange Attractor is sort of the brainchild of Mark Pilkington, who was used to be the managing editor for the Fortean Times back when I was writing some stuff for them. And of course, he also wrote the book Mirage Men, which is a must for all people interested in what the hell UFOs are about.
And he wrote the documentary, which was based on that book as well, also called Mirage Men, which is about Rick Doty and the Benowitz affair, and something I've ranted about hundreds of times on this show and my other old show, A Mysterious Library. It's an incredible book.
Yeah. So he had encouraged me to write this book because I've been doing, sort of programs of unusual music, sometimes at Fortean conferences or contexts, sometimes just in galleries or disreputable theaters. And I've been putting together programs of just musical oddities, music from secret societies and cults, and music by writers. For example, Edward Lear wrote some music. James Joyce wrote some music. Lewis Carroll wrote a couple of pieces. So those were fun to sort of put together. And Mark had been encouraging me to make some kind of book out of this. So I decided to really specialize on music that was not written by the usual methods or for the usual social contexts. So obviously something like music from a secret society, somebody wrote the piece and then they played it when they met. So it was not, in many ways, it was not that different from, a Protestant hymn. It was a piece that they wrote and then they had their service and they sang it. So this was this was music that came often from some anomalous source. I also want to say that the book was designed by Tihana Share, designer in Croatia, and she did just a beautiful job. I think I was very tickled to see that. When I first turned the manuscript into Mark, I said, "Oh, the manuscript is finished. Break out the green ink." So people in the UK will know that the green ink is the sign of a crackpot.
Is it really? I didn't
Yes.
know that.
The green ink letter is the letter that people write to the editor. It's just sort of like random capitalization in America. It's a sign. If you write your letter in green ink, that's proof that you have something wrong with you. So I was tickled that they managed to use a lot of green ink in it.
There
But
is
Tiana
green ink
Shari,
in that.
Tiana Shari did a great job. There's also let's bring this out. There's also a limited hardback edition, which has a signed book plate. It's got bookmarks in it.
Wow. Is this still available, the hardback, or?
Well, we made 300 of them. So I assume not all of them have sold.
Because I bought my copy just like my green screen is shining through.
Yeah.
I bought my copy just on Amazon, but I didn't see a hardback there. I'm going to have to go and seek out and see if there's that hardback still available so I can add it to
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's at strangeattractor.co.uk. I don't know if they're offering it at the MIT site. Forget their URL for MIT Press, but
I should say just quickly too, based on, and they should go and check out Strange. And so it's Strange Attract. What's that website again, in case they want the hardback?
It's strangeattractor.co.uk, and they put out a lot of interesting books on surrealism and psychedelics and punk culture and Forteana.
Indeed. And they can also, of course, if they want to just get the soft cover, they can get it on Amazon or where most good books are sold, right?
Yeah.
But just to while we're on the introduction of the book, and then I might get you to do a bit of an overview of it for our audience. And that is, this book, Doug, is gorgeous. You mentioned the person who did the design before. What was her name again?
Tiana Shari.
Incredible. Because just so people know, there's there's gorgeous illustrations in there, which are from the period of when these various songs are from or related to them. But there's also the second half of the book is the original. Well, there's notes in there extensively, which are also wonderful, but there's also the music itself.
Yeah. Lots of sheet music.
Yeah. And as I said, I mentioned to you before off the show, I think my girlfriend's daughter, I think she's just turned 16. She's an Italian musician and she can play violin. And I know some of these songs were for the violin. So I should buy her a copy just to get her to play the fairy music for me, which we'll get to again in a minute.
Don't delay. Quick, do it now. We can wait until after the show here. Yeah, she did a great job also because a lot of the music, and I did want the music to be in the book, came from, online scans from libraries, 19th century manuscripts, badly printed UFO magazines, all sorts of sources that needed to be improved before they could be printed. So she did a lot of digital surgery on them.
There's something about this book that I've read widely in the Fortean world. I have a PhD in ufology, so I know if I spent or wasted 10 years of my life, depending how you look at it, doing nothing but reading strange material, both primary and secondary sources. But there's something about this book which is very different to any other Fortean book I've ever read. We were saying it's gorgeously put together. It's a very beautiful book, but it talks about something which I had very little knowledge of, and that is music from elsewhere, which we're about to get to. But your erudition and your wit, Doug, I knew what your wit was like because I'd met you and your erudition, and I'd seen you speak at Fort Fest, and I'd watched some of your other lectures. Some of them are still available on YouTube. But to have put this book together was quite a phenomenal feat. I don't know if you want to talk about that first, or if you want to do an overview of the book, or
I was gathering information for years, and a lot of it is just standard musical curiosity. And as I said, I first of all started by collecting all sorts of material, and then narrowed it down to music that could be attributed to anomalous sources. I had a couple of criteria for the book. One is that I was interested in the accounts where they actually had the music, where somebody was able to, not only say I was walking by the church one night and there was a strange melody playing, but they notated the melody so we could know what that was. And I also, of course, had to have music that was in the public domain because I wanted to print it. So I did organize the material into 8 different categories, which, they kind of meld into each other. And a lot of the categories, some piece of information could go into either one or the other, some little piece of music. But the first chapter, consult my book here, is this is chapter 0, and this is on music that isn't there. So this is music that we can't hear. There's mythological music. For example, we have the music that the sirens supposedly sang to Odysseus, or the music that Orpheus charmed animals and stones with. And obviously we can't even imagine that, because if we knew what the music was, then we would be able to drive Odysseus mad or charm the rocks out in their backyard. Also includes fictional music, lost music. There's because most of the music that has been performed at this point is lost. We didn't have musical notation until somewhat late in our human development in all cultures. And we didn't have recording till the late 19th century. So before that, we just have music that's lost. And there's also a sort of a history of the silent piece. Some people may be familiar with John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, always a hit. But there's a tradition of silent pieces going back to 1883, at least. Alphonse Allais wrote a delightful funeral march for a great deaf man. And you could argue that any ceremonial or social use of silence could be classified as a silent piece. But one of the interesting things about that is that, of course, all these pieces are going to sound alike, but we frame them in different ways, bring different expectations to them. In chapter 1, then, we get into the music we can hear, is on the music of the ultra-terrestrials. And since we talked about John Keel, I'll mention that I used this word, which is a word that he helped popularize. He defined it as related to this earth, but set apart from it by unusual physical characteristics. Neither superior or inferior to the human race, but different. So I'm using it here for beings that are connected with the earth. So these are all the sort of mythological creatures that live on the earth. So the fairies, banshees, elves, trolls, the trowies of the Shetland Islands, which are kind of a troll. Some of which give us music, and some of which don't. The interesting thing about this music I've found is that most of it comes from the UK, the British Isles, or from Scandinavia. And a lot of cultures, of course, have some sort of tradition of music, of little beings, fairies, elves, whatever their local folklore is. But UK and Scandinavia seem to be the main places where they attribute music to these creatures. But I'm still looking, and certainly I hope other people can find them. So chapter 2 then is on the music of the sky people. So there I separated out the reports that supposedly come from creatures that live in the sky, which would be angels, aliens, and spirits often. And of course, a lot of these become conflated. Some of the reports of aliens, for example, are very similar to the reports of fairies, as people like Jacques Vallée have pointed out, which I'm sure Dean has taken notes on. I
have indeed, Doug.
Yes, it's about fairies and aliens. If they have people who claim interaction with them have claimed missing time, stolen fetuses, preoccupation with water, and with salt, and with metal. So that's I've gathered together what music I could find attributed to them. Chapter 3 is on the music of the dear departed. So this is music that's attributed to dead composers. So this includes music that's channeled from dead composers, music that comes from seances. Sometimes the sources of this music is somewhat unclear too. People claim that it just came from the past or that it came from spirits. Chapter 4 is on musical ciphers, So this includes music that was used as a code system, as a cipher system. Sometimes this was just simply people assigning pitches to letters and then writing codes that way, which, however, does produce some very unusual pieces of music when the material is organized linguistically rather than musically. And I also include in there some of the constructed languages, the conlangs, that have been based on musical materials. Foremost among those is sans réseau, which was developed in the 19th century by a man named François Sudre. And he developed quite this elaborate kind of musical Esperanto, which has to be heard to be believed. Chapter 5 then is on speculative music. So this generally is not music that you could hear, but these are the people who have attempted to create some sort of model of the universe, model of the cosmos, using musical means, often doing drawings of the universe as a giant tuned string that is being played by the hand of God. The music of the spheres comes into there too, assigning various pitches to the planets and attempting to find a great cosmic harmony among the planets, as well as various, schemas. People have made diagrams attempting to organize all material into a giant mandala, for example, which is often based primarily on music. Chapter 6 is on the language of the birds, because I was interested in the fact that we have always had an interaction with birds, with the sound of nature overall, but particularly with the language of the birds. And we've often based music on birdsong and also tried to teach birds how to sing according to our standards. The nightingale is probably the sort of the archetype of the songbird, and there have been attempts to notate the song of the nightingale going back, I think, at least to the Greeks. I think Aristophanes was the first to do that. But that includes also music based on nature, such as attempts to transcribe the sounds of waterfalls, whale song, which came in later, of course, when we started to realize that we could record the songs of whales. And there are many attempts in the 19th century, too, particularly to notate the sounds of insects or buckets filling with water and various other things. How I end up, chapter 7 is music from dreams, because a lot of these accounts could possibly have come from dreams. I think a lot of, for example, if somebody is walking through a field in Ireland late one night, which people do, of course, and he claims that he hears the fairies playing some music, it's possible that he could have just dozed off and heard something in a hypnagogic state, in that state between dreaming or waking, and then attributed it to the fairies. Possibly if he had a different cultural filter, he would have attributed it to the angels. And perhaps originally it could have been the sound of birds or the sound of a waterfall that was making that music in his dream or in his half dream. So that's the sort of the 8 categories that I came up with, including 0. And as I said, they all do kind of meld into one another. Hard to separate them sometimes.
I think that's the general reality of the Fortean world, though. That's something that your dear friend John Keel would often talk about, this kind of similarity, or perhaps there was some root. So there might have been a root phenomena behind all this different phenomenon. So in many ways, there's a Keelian aspect to your book as well. But one of the things I loved about this, there's so many things I loved about it, and we're going to break down some of the chapters in a minute, because there are some which I like it all, but there's some I really adore. But one of the things I loved about it is I'm somebody who has been influenced by Keel and Jacques Vallée and Patrick Harper and other people who were thinking about and writing about this decades before I even, was old enough to think about it. But that's the idea that we might bring some kind of, cultural expectation to our dealings with the anomalous when it comes to the visual reality. So people people, when we talk about people imagine things, it obviously comes from image. When we talk about people, visualizing things, there's this sense normally when I've talked about on this show and on my old show, Mysterious Library, on both of them regularly, so regular listeners know, I think, that maybe some of our interpretation visually when we encounter the other or encounter the anomalous is loaded with these cultural expectations or is infected by our own psychology. But the idea that this might also occur at an audio level, and what's the word for the audio equivalent of visualizing or imagining?
I had to dive into that at the beginning, particularly when I was talking about the music that is only in your head when you're trying to figure out what the horn sounded like when the wall of Jericho fell. And the word is audiate, because the word imagine or depict, these are all visual images. So I found that word. I forget who used that originally. I credit him in the book. I do credit him in the book. But it's a very useful word, because we don't form an image. We don't form a picture of these things. But so much of our language is so visually based that becomes a bias for us.
Maybe we can jump into some of the actual chapters now. There's so many, we're not going to be able to talk about all of them. But I had a number that I particularly loved. I love the whole book, but there's a number I particularly loved. And anybody who's a regular viewer or listener to this show, as well as their understanding of my kind of psychosocial analysis, again, following Keel and Allais and others, is that I have an obsession with the fair folk, with the fairies. So chapter 1 was obviously one of my favorites in the book. Is that something you'd like to talk about and maybe play some of the tracks from?
And since you are, as you said, as we know from Australia, is there much of a fairy folk tradition in Australia?
That's a good question. Well,
I sort of looked into it and I didn't find much.
No, I think that there are traditions within our original inhabitants, the Aboriginals. There's ideas of the dream time. There's an idea of this other reality that you can still perhaps enter. And there's an idea of not interaction with, I suppose, mythical beings like every culture has. And then we had a very large, we had a big immigration, obviously, from the UK in general, but there were a lot of Irish people also came. So the stories are there, but we don't have perhaps as rich a fairy tradition as some other cultures, I think. I think in Australia. But certainly your book looks at a lot of the things from the UK, which is, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Irish fairy fans.
They seem to have been one of the main sources for actually writing down the tunes that the fairies sang. I mean, there are all these other cultures. There's the Pukwudgies in the United States, the American Indian tradition that, but I haven't heard any music that came from. You have the Menehune in Hawaii too. They're little people, and I think they are credited with being musical, but I found music about them, but not somebody who said this is the music that they sang or that they played.
You know what, just quickly, I have a good friend, Susie Bastille, who's been a guest on this show. I've been a guest on her show. Her channel is called the Pukwudgie Whisperer. Her primary interest is Pukwudgie research. So I'll have to reach out to Susie and ask her if there is any Pukwudgie musical traditions.
Yeah. I'd be surprised. I know the Pukwudgies are not a particularly festive brand of paranormal beings. They're often quite nasty. I don't know if they go in for music.
Maybe we could, would you like to play any of the songs? Because you were kind enough, again, people can get, and where do they get the album on Bandcamp? Because to me, just to let them know, to me, one of the great joys of reading the book, which I shouldn't hold up because it will get green screened out, to reading the book music from elsewhere, is that they can go to Bandcamp and actually listen to many of the musical pieces. There's like 30 or so?
There's 32 of them. And again, I have to credit Brian Dewan, wonderful musician in his own right, an artist in his own right, who helped me with this, setting up the mics and mixing them while I made my noises. But yeah, we did recorded 32 of them, often very brief. And you can find them on Bandcamp. Strange Attractor has its own channel on Bandcamp, and they have it there. And I would recommend that you read the book if you're going to listen to these, because a lot of them will probably seem very puzzling without some explanation of what they are. Just some little scrap of an odd tune.
Oh, they're definitely companion pieces. Like, people should definitely have the book and the album, because then they can do what I did, like jump over and listen to some of the music as well.
Mm-hmm. And of course, with Bandcamp, you can always go and listen to the music. You don't have to buy it unless you want to, but that can give you some idea of what it is. Well, we could start off with Thomas Wood's Pisky music from Cornwall, which I think we discussed doing before. This was a composer in the 1920s, and he was in Cornwall, apparently by a waterfall, which could be important. And he heard this sort of musical fabric, this musical texture in the air. It didn't really have much of a melody or much of a rhythm, but it was this sort of fabric of shifting harmonies. And he wrote it down, fortunately. He notated it for 4 violins, which I didn't have, so I played it on the keyboard. But to me, it was significant too, in that he said that he heard this near a waterfall, because there have been other reports of people hearing music near waterfalls, because waterfalls provide white noise, and we can always hear things in white noise. If you've gone into the electronic voice phenomena, you know that happens too.
Right.
People can hear all sorts of things in the white noise. And in fact, in the book too, I also have in one of the chapters, some nice man in the 19th century actually notated the chord that a waterfall, that Niagara Falls, in fact, that Niagara Falls was playing. He thought it was playing a giant, I think it was a D major chord. So people can hear that in the music. But so we might as well play this. This is he notated this in 1921 when he was in Cornwall, and he attributed it to the local little people who are called Piskies in that part of the world.
I love that, by the way, the Piskies instead of Pixies.
Instead of Pixies, yeah. And so that's the first track there, number 1.
Okay, let's roll that.
And of course, it just continued repeating. I guess if this were a 70s pop song, we could fade it out. But we'll save the listeners that.
I love it. There's such an innocence to that tune.
Well, it's interesting because it's not common practice, as we call harmonies. These are not major chords. These are more like the chords that 20th century composers were using, like Debussy and Hindemith and Stravinsky and so on, and not really the kind of music that Thomas Wood wrote most of the time. He tended to write sort of hearty drinking songs and marching songs, and he did several variations on Waltzing Matilda for chorus. So this was sort of a departure for him.
I'd love to hear his Waltzing Matilda versions as well.
You can find it. You look for Thomas Wood.
It does, and we'll get to more in a minute, but the title music from elsewhere is wonderful. Not only that it obviously references the fact that these things are supposedly from other places, but that it is different. There's an alienness to it. There's
Mhm.
something about it which is different to the music we're used to hearing, to all of it.
Well, the idea was that it was not written according to the normal, tools of consciousness. So, although I doubt that he actually heard the Piskies when he was in Cornwall, he still was hearing something in his head, which was different from the sort of thing that he would usually write.
See, I'm a sucker for fairy faith. Again, people who watch and listen regularly know, like, if I'm going to believe in any of these things, it's going to be the fairy faith, the fairy lore that I'm going to believe in. There's something about it that, I don't know, for whatever reason, resonates with me, perhaps because I do have a fair amount of Celtic or Gaelic, background in me. But I love the idea that maybe, I know you're more sensible than I am, but that maybe these people did hear something from the fair folk and put it down.
Well, that's, once you invent these things, then they exist, whether they exist physically or not. So,
and you have
people have been hearing Piskies, so that's why they gave it a name.
Well, indeed. And you have several tracks from the fair folk or the other crowd or the whatever we want to call them. Are there any others that you'd like to visit?
Let's try one of the Trowie tunes. Let's leave England. The Trowie tunes are from the Shetland Islands in Scotland. And the Trowies are the local little people. And the name is basically the same root as trolls. And they're these little, rustic people. And when we talk about the little people, I guess we should point out here that we're talking, most of the folklore has them being about 2 or 3 feet high. They're not, little Tinkerbells.
And that's track number 9. Is that right, from Norway, did you say?
Oh, I was looking, these are some of the Shetland Islands.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So let me find one. Let's say track number 6. This is a tune called Winya Depla. And it was supposedly collected by Gibby Lawrenson in 1803. And he said that he was in his little hut or shed or whatever it was, and some Trowies came around and played this song, and he wrote it down.
Lovely.
So they're usually very brief fiddle tunes like that. And part of the tradition of them was that in an evening you could not repeat them. You had to play them once. You couldn't repeat Winya Depla in the course of a single evening.
Ah, interesting.
Which is
Was it because it was cursed or something if you did, or?
I don't know. I think they were afraid of summoning the Trowies' attention and them wanting more royalties or something. I don't know.
There was I guess I have no musical, as I was telling you beforehand. I don't have any. I love music, but I don't have any music ability or any musical talent, and I don't play any instruments. Although I might have tried in my teen years to be cool. But there seems to almost be a through line through a lot of it. Like there does seem to be a commonality, even though there can be difference in melody or lack of melody or whatever. What are some of the commonalities you noticed when, as you who are a musician and are, I assume, classically trained, what were some of the things you noticed which were similar across some of these?
Well, they do seem to be generally diatonic. That is, that they're in what you might think of as the major scale or the minor scale. And I've been asked about that sometimes in lectures when I've talked about this, if there have been any, microtonal music that people have reported or music in different tuning systems. And the answer, I guess, has to be that there might have been, but that the people who are writing it down could only notate a diatonic melody. That's perhaps all they heard. They might not have heard all of the microtonal variations. So there is that. They do have that in common. And they are, of course, often similar to the folk music of that particular area because they come out of the same culture. They come out of the same story, the same stories. People tell fairy tales, and then they play the music that came from the fairy tales.
And I think that's one of the reasons that chapter fascinated me so much, chapter 1, is because I'm so aware of so much of the tales that come out of Ireland, for example, is often having a musical component, like a fiddler, playing with the fair folk, or somebody being asked to come and play for them, or somebody hearing the music as they walk past a fairy fort or something late at night. So music seems to be an integral part of at least the telling of the old fairy lore tales from Ireland, for example.
Yeah, in Ireland and in Scotland. There's, in Wales, in England too. But there is some from Scandinavia. We might as well look at one of the. Do you want to look at one of the ones from Norway?
Wonderful, yeah.
So this is some music from Denmark. No, I think this is Norway. Sorry, this is from Norway, which is attributed to the trolls. And as I was doing the research for this, I was going through old books of Norse folk tunes, and because I don't speak the language, I was looking for certain keywords. But this comes up often, or at least a couple of times I found it, either as trollmusik or underjordisk music, either underground or troll music. And it was traditionally attributed to the trolls, and there are stories of people passing by a mountain and hearing, this eerie music coming up from the cave, especially at Christmas, people hearing it at Christmas. So we do have, but fortunately they did write it down. So we do have some of the troll music from Norway, and this would be number 9. This is a version from 1841. Credit where credit is due. This was arranged by Ludwig Matthias Lindemann.
Okay, let's listen to it.
Number 9, yep. There you go. And I found it, as I said, in a couple of anthologies.
Wow.
Arranged differently, harmonized differently, but always in the same key. It seems to be the key of the trolls, key of A.
It is, again, I don't have the musical acumen to describe it perhaps technically correctly, but it seems to be, I don't know, more sophisticated or more complicated than some of the 2 earlier songs that we listened to.
That might be the harmonization of it. If you play it without the harmonization, you just have da dum dum da 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 da. So you just have an unaccompanied tune. It would probably not sound that different.
Okay, no, fascinating. And I wonder, is that a later? I'm wondering too, is that a later recording or a later notation than say the Piskies one, or?
No, actually, this comes earlier. This one was. Oh. This one comes from 1841. And again, it was from a book of harmonizations of of folk tunes of various kinds, including the troll tunes. But the Pisky music is from 1921.
Wow. That sounded like the older, like it seemed very, like I said, more, I don't want to say less sophisticated because that seems insulting, but it seemed more innocent or more childlike, and it just seemed very simple, to me. Maybe we could jump though, because I could talk about the fair folk and the music in the book about the fair folk with you for the next 2 hours, but maybe we should jump ahead to the people from the sky, the sky people, the UFO-nauts and the angels.
Since you've trafficked so much in the muddy waters of ufology.
Right.
Yeah, so I decided to separate out that material from the ones that were attributed to the creatures on the earth, pretty much just to give them a category, just have somewhere to put them. But we, there's always been music attributed to angels going back at least to, the Gospels, where the angels supposedly appeared to the shepherds and either sang something or recited something in unison. It's not clear from the context. And there have been many tunes that have been attributed to angels, including parts of the traditional Catholic Mass. And then for the aliens, of course, they're often conflated because they come from the sky. I'm sure Dean could fill you in on all the connections between angel and alien sightings. I'd like to perhaps look at one by Philip Rogers. This is from, I think, around 1967, although I wasn't able to track down much more information about it. But Philip Rogers was he was a recorder player in the UK, and he was blind, or I think he was almost blind and then became more blind. And he became very interested in flying saucers. There was a craze going on, and recorder players become interested in flying saucers like everyone else. But he couldn't set up cameras because of his limited eyesight, so he set up tape recorders to try to catch transmissions from outer space.
Wow.
And he caught all sorts of things. Unfortunately, almost all of his tapes have been lost. I think there's only one that survives. It sounds like a children's party. And don't know, so, we can't hear them and find out what exactly was going on. It's likely that he got some crossfading from shortwave radio and other radio transmissions. But he did claim that he got some music as well. And I haven't found if he actually recorded this or he found this through channeling or it was transmitted to him in some other way. But this, according to him, is from about 1967. This is some music from outer space. Philip Rogers.
And is this track number 12, I think?
This is track number 11.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I checked. Yep, you're right.
Yep.
Wow.
There you go. And the music is in the book, so you can You and your friends can get together and play it.
Like I said, I'll have to convince my my girlfriend to get her daughter to play some of this for me. Taking that track, what are the similarities you see that with some of the earlier fairy faith music, or pixie, or piskies, or troll music, or any of those things?
It does seem rather different to me. It has a limited set of pitches. I think it uses like only 4 or 5 pitches, all of which are in the diatonic scale, in the major scale. But there's a sort of a randomness to it that you don't have in some of the other music. It just kind of doesn't go anywhere, which leads me to wonder if perhaps this was one of the pieces that was channeled, because a lot of channeled material also just seems to have nowhere in particular to go. You know, channeled music is kind of improvisational and not very structured. And channeled writing, if you've read any channeled books, they really just don't go anywhere. They make sense, like on a single page, and then you get into the next page and you're onto a different train of thought. So it has that sort of quality to it.
Is that because you talk in the book about, and again, I don't have that necessarily the musical language, but you talk about black keys being a preference as far as piano music goes. Like it's the black keys that are often used.
Yeah, for some people who like to trance out on the piano or on the organ. There were a couple of them who did that. There was, in fact, there was a flying saucer contactee, Siracusa, I think his name was, in Italy, who made some records where he was just sort of playing the organ. And he tended to just ramble on the black keys. I guess the advantage of that is that you only have those 5 pitches, and so everything is going to sort of sound fine. You're not going to have any dissonances. You're not going to have anything that people would hear as a discord.
What about the music of the dear departed, or the music of the deceased? I didn't know anything about this. Not that I knew anything about the other stuff, other than the fairy faith. There's often music attached, but for example, the Fox sisters, who are often thought to be the progenitors of much of the spiritualist movement, I didn't know they'd done it. I didn't know they'd had any music attached to them, but there is. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
This was interesting to me. Interesting, I hope, to the reader. Yeah, for those who don't know the Fox sisters, that was Katie and Maggie and Leah up in upstate New York, and they claimed that they could communicate with the dead through the system of table rapping. They would get this knocking. And this turned into a whole movement, a whole social movement that became quite popular I guess they started in the 1850s. And of course, it was exacerbated by the Civil War, because so many people died. And so a lot of people wanted to contact the dead. There were so many of them. But they did claim that they received one song by table rapping called The Haunted Ground. And it's a little dubious. Among other things, a couple of the sisters confessed that they had, in fact, made the knocking sounds by snapping their tendons, and demonstrated this publicly.
Right.
So it's this is a very dubious piece of music, but I think it was Maggie who one day was sitting with Leah, and the call for the table rapping came. And so Maggie used, apparently as the channel for this, knocked out this series of letters. Leah said it didn't make any sense, and then the table rapping said to apply it to the pitches of the piano. And but one of the interesting things about this is that this was a song that they did used to play or sing at their gatherings, at their seances, when they held their, invite the public in. They would all gather around the piano and they would sing this song. And I think I, as far as I can tell, I'm the first person to have recorded it, because I looked for recordings of it. Nobody else. Yeah. And I was very happy, because I went up to Lilydale, spiritualist conclave in upstate New York, which is they even have there the imprint of the old Fox sisters' cottage that burned down.
Do they really?
Yeah, as well as many artifacts of them. And I was happy that I was able to perform that in the auditorium there, perhaps
Wow.
first time. But we could listen to The Haunted Ground. The poetry for this comes from a popular poet of the time named Felicia Hemans. And one of the many dubious things about this was that this supposedly channeled piece of music was fit exactly a poem by Felicia Hemans.
Ah.
But it's the only piece of music that I've found that supposedly came from table rapping.
Fascinating.
So,
okay, let's
so that's
play.
number 14. It's from 1851, The Haunted Ground.
Yes, it is haunted, this quiet scene, fair as it looks and all softly green. Yet fear thou not, for the spell is thrown, and the might of the shadows on me alone. Have I not under these whispering leaves woven such dreams as the young heart weaves, shadows yet unto which life seemed bound? And is it not haunted ground?
Performed on a little upright piano in an attempt to simulate
Wow.
the original performances in the Fox living room.
It does have a 19th century, like a mid-19th century feel for some reason to me.
Oh yeah, well the harmonic language and the sentimentality of it is definitely very much of its time.
And that does feel different to, I don't know, again, lacking musical language, but there to me seems some commonality perhaps between some of that earlier fairy music and the Space Brother music that we heard. But this seems different again. This seems very different.
Again, that might be the arrangement. I wanted to put it in there in the arrangement that the Fox sisters themselves published and used, but supposedly the original channeled music was just the tune without the piano accompaniment.
Okay. So they might have elaborated on the original channeled.
Well, the melody, the part that I was singing there, that was what was channeled. And then some nice friend of theirs did a piano arrangement for them.
Okay.
So this was the version that they played in their seances and in their evenings at home.
Wow. I'm going to jump forward to another chapter now, as I've talked to you about previously before this episode. Is my daughter has an obsession with birds. She loves birds. So when I was reading this book next to her on the couch, when she saw me open to the splash page, which had the bird illustrations on it, she got super excited. And then when I was listening to the music, she was particularly excited about the bird music. She was interested in all of them, particularly excited about the bird music. And as you mentioned before, there's, I suppose, the most recognized bird of occultism or spiritualism or significance is the nightingale, and it's part of David Lynch's storytelling as well. He has Julie Cruz sing a song about the nightingale in the lyrics he wrote for her first album, and birds appear regularly in Lynch's movies, like I think of the Robin in Blue Velvet. We obviously lost David Lynch recently, but there does seem to be something about birds having some significance with with the other, and with occultism. And generally, of course, there's everybody from, Jung through older traditions. There's an idea of birds being somehow connected with the dead, being somehow part of the spiritual world, somehow having something to tell us. So I was interested on this level. My daughter was just interested because it was the language of the birds. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that chapter.
Well, I called that chapter "The Language of the Birds" rather than "The Music of the Birds," partially because there is an alchemical tradition. Not sure how far back it goes, but it was particularly popularized by everyone's favorite Fulcanelli in the early 20th century, who used to talk about what he called the language of the birds, which was a sort of a code, a cipher built up on the sounds of words, particularly. So the idea was that birds taught us how to communicate in certain ways, taught us how to communicate in certain coded ways, or at least they were the model for that. So that's why I called it the language of the birds, as opposed to the music of the birds. But we've been trying to notate music of the birds and to get them to sing our music for many, many years. There's a real interesting tradition through the 18th and the 19th century of people trying to write down birdsong using, Western musical notation and the alphabet, which doesn't work, of course, because birds do not sing in our tonality, and they don't sing in our alphabet. But many people have tried to write music based on birds. I guess the cuckoo is also one of the more familiar ones. Lots of composers like to put the song of the cuckoo in their work. There's Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, for example. A cuckoo shows up at one point. And I did have a little bit here. I found this woman who wrote in the early 20th century named Helen Phillips Eddy. And she wrote children's songs that were based on bird songs, which I thought was a kind of an interesting development of that idea of basing music on bird songs. So we could, for example, hear her interpretation of the Maryland yellowthroat. This was to teach children bird songs.
Interestingly, my daughter instantly knew what the yellowthroat was, but not the Maryland yellowthroat, the ordinary, or I think it's called the ordinary or normal yellowthroat, which lives in Wisconsin. So she pulled out her bird book and got super excited. Sorry, I jumped in on that.
But this woman, Helen Phillips Eddy, she wrote a book called Treetop Tunes for Tiny Tots. And she's not the only composer to have done that. Of course, Olivier Messiaen wrote a whole huge piano cycle transcribing bird song into piano music. But she's a kind of an unknown heroine of this genre. So we can listen to a very short one, track 27. It's the Maryland Yellowthroat from Helen Phillips Eddy.
Lovely. And again, my daughter enjoyed this one.
Down by the riverside, deep in the thicket, it's witchery, witchery, witchery. For it's pleasant and cool by the side of the pool. Oh, it's witchery, witchery, witchery.
So an odd little piece, certainly not the kind of song that people usually write.
Well, I sung it to my daughter when I was reading the book, and again, I have no musical skill, and then so I went and played her the Bandcamp version with you doing it, and she preferred that far more, I think.
Well, it was based apparently on the Maryland yellowthroat that she heard.
I love that there is this language, perhaps, that birds have. There is, and as I mentioned to you before, because when we were talking about doing the show, I have chickens, so they do have different sounds and they sing different things for different moods and different meanings. Like there literally is a language of the birds, I think. And I can even decipher some of it, as can my daughter, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, in the book there, I did dig up somebody who had put together a dictionary of chicken language.
We love that, by the way.
just as somebody else had come up with a dictionary of the language of the crows. So there were people who were listening to chickens and listening to the crows and trying to figure out what they meant by their sounds, which is a strange thing to do, but people have done it.
When you live with them, I think it does seem crazy, because I never had chickens when I was in Australia or in Sydney. But when you live with them, you do notice that there's a difference. Like there is the sounds they make. And so when we were reading it, and I was trying to do the sounds reading it, a lot of them are still the same. A lot of them made sense to us. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
That's what probably the chickens mean then.
Yeah.
But we've gone a little bit. Is it okay that we've gone a little bit over? I know I only told you an hour, but we've gone a little over.
It's up to you.
If you're happy to go for another 10 or so minutes, because I would love to look at your chapter on music in dreams, because that was probably I love the whole book, but my 4 favorite chapters were probably the fairies, the sky people, the bird chapter, and music in dreams. And music in dreams is the most personal chapter, because you talk about your own dreams in that chapter.
Well, I had to. In order to talk about dreams, I had to have access to some sort of dream that I could analyze, just to figure out where the musical material was coming from. So I sort of regretted that it had to be personal, because I didn't want to. I'm writing about music. I'm not writing about myself. And music is much bigger than me.
I think it makes the book stronger, by the way. I think it really is wonderful that there's that personal element to it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Well, there is that idea I'm sure you've run across that in the academic world, that you should not separate yourself too much from what you are studying.
Right.
That you have to acknowledge that you are part of this society as well, this culture as well. You're not aloof from it.
Exactly.
And I do hear music in my dreams, as all people who play music or write music. Is that it just keeps, you do that during the day, and then when you go to sleep, your brain keeps working on that. So I found that most of the music that I had heard in my dreams was either music from somebody else that I had played, and I was just sort of shuffling or rearranging it a little bit, or it's music that I'd written, and again, I was just doing a variation on it. There are a couple of them that I wasn't able to trace, which is interesting, but that doesn't mean that they're original. It could just mean that they came from something that I'd forgotten about.
Is there anything you would like to play from that chapter for us, or?
Well, I just have the track here, which is just snippets of music from my own dreams, each of them played twice, because these were all very brief, and I would often wake up and have this little snippet running through my brain, and then I would, write it down so I wouldn't forget it. But we could play that. That's like a little under 3 minutes. That's track 32, the last one there.
Well, that seems like a good way to begin to see the show out, and then we'll come back afterwards and I'll have another question or two for you. But this is lovely, so let's play this.
Here's one. Here's the second one. Here it is again. And a third one. That was on a toy piano, as I recall, in my dream. A very brief one. The next one? Was that it? Oh.
Was it still going? Should I unpause it?
Well, that's a good example of them. I don't remember how many. Oh, there's another one. Oh, yes.
So maybe you could say, when these came to you, did you, as soon as you woke up, you like notated them, or?
Yeah. Well, I think what often happened was that I was in that sort of half dreaming, half waking state, and I was playing them over and over again in my head, and often like writing them in my head, I think, changing things here and there. So it was a compositional process, but in not entirely conscious state.
It's interesting, though, how that might also be connected to many of these different types. As you've said, they mightn't be unrelated. Like, people might be in different states of consciousness. The same way when you're sleeping, they might be in a different state when they hear music from the Space Brothers, or music from the Fair Folk, or music from wherever, music from elsewhere.
And there could be some sort of outside sources doing that. As I said, waterfalls could be doing that, birds. And it could also be, some guy with a violin wandering around as well. Some of these might come from somebody else just playing music.
Or a fairy.
And then they heard it, yeah.
You know what? I'm going to make you play one more, because if you don't mind, because there's an interesting story in your book, and it's one of my favorite stories, about people who were at sea or off the coast and they heard music. Can you tell us that story?
Off the coast of Ireland, the Blasket Islands. Yeah, this was a tune that the sailors would hear when they were at sea, and they heard this music sort of wafting over the waves. So they assumed that it was either spirits or fairies. And so they learned it. I guess they heard it enough to learn it, or remembered some version of it, and turned it into a traditional tune called Portnapuki, the Song of the Spirits. But in later years, we started recording songs of humpback whales, and some people started hearing these, sorry to use the weasel words, but this was more than one person, I think, who heard this and said, oh, I recognize in the humpback whales songs this melody, or at least enough of it to figure that one might have caused the other. So there's a possibility then of this song that has been attributed to fairies, or to spirits, or to humpback whales.
Should we listen to it?
Yeah, and this was originally on the this would originally be played on the pipes, Irish pipes. So I did put a drone under it.
And can you tell me the track number? I was just looking for
track 31.
Excellent. That's why I was looking higher. So here it is. wonderful.
There you are, wafting over the water.
And this is a lovely story that maybe it was, the whales and people thought it was something else.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, that was a good example of how some of this material could have been generated from different sources or seen through different cultural filters.
I think that's the most fascinating part of it to me is what was from like a genuine elsewhere and what was from our own elsewhere, where we were transposing our ideas onto these sounds we were hearing. And perhaps we'll never know. But it's a wonderful book, and it's an amazing accompanying set of music. So no, thank you, Doug, for putting this all together.
Well, thank you, Dean. And people are interested, they can go to strangeattractor.co.uk, find out more. And it's being, distributed in bookstores. A friend of mine found it in the Juilliard store, which tickled.
That's wonderful.
I'm glad to think of music students finding it.
It should be compulsory. There should be a course, music from elsewhere 101. That would be wonderful. But it was so much. It's just a great joy to talk to you. I was going to say fun, which it was as well, but fun doesn't do it. It was a great joy to talk to you, Doug.
Well, you too, Dean.
Well, and people should. Where else can they find you? Where else can they find what you're up to?
Well, I put my website up there, dougskinner.net, which I assure people is not about what I ate for lunch and about my political opinions, but it's just a record of my work and the books that I've written, the music that I've written.
Well, people should definitely go to that. I'll put that address also in the show notes in case people are just listening and don't see the screen. Although people should watch the visuals sometimes too. But this episode has been particularly an audio-driven version, so maybe you don't even have to see the visuals in this one. But again, thank you so much for visiting with me, Doug. It was just amazing.
And thank you, Dean.
And until I get to talk to you again, Doug, which hopefully will be soon, until I get to talk to everybody else out there next week, please keep it weird.